So hello, welcome to this video where we're going to speak to the Prisma team. So we've got Luan and Emily from the engineering team, and Vladdy's going to jump in if we say anything incorrect to make sure we're right. And Prisma, if I've got this right, is a client ORM, but it also has a cloud data platform where you can visualize schemas, change them, and do everything you want. And it works with Node and TypeScript to connect to databases. And then the front end itself is pretty much written in React. And anyone at the moment can try the front end. They can go in, set up accounts, use it, do whatever they want, because you're building it up and trying to grow the audience. Is that right to start with? All right, great. So do you want to explain any more about it, or do you just want to jump straight into a demo of the platform and what it can do?
No, I think let's jump into the demo and then we'll take from there.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the Prisma Data Platform is our application that you can interact with your database with. So we offer three main features. The first one is the data browser, which we'll demo in a couple seconds. And then we also have the query console, so you can use Prisma Client to execute queries against your database remotely, which is pretty cool. And finally, we have the data proxy, which allows you to connect to your database when you're using serverless environments. It's a connection pooling manager. So I will now give you a small demo of the Prisma Data Platform and just go through the onboarding flow. So typically you would log in, create a project. Your GitHub account would be created for you and connected. You would just give your project a name. So I'll do AG-Grid demo. So this, I can either create a repository or import a existing repository. For this demo, I'm going to create a new repository. So something will actually be pushed to my GitHub account after this is done. So I can now select a template. So we've prepared these example schemas for people who are new to Prisma, for example, or want to test it out. I'm going to choose the music streaming service first because it's a pretty simple schema, but it's complicated enough where there's some relations that we can talk about a little bit more. I'll also include sample data here. So when the database is created, there will be some dummy data that we can manipulate to showcase the data browser. So I'll go next, and I can also provision a new database or use an existing database. I'm going to provision a new database in this case, and we currently support PlanetScale or Heroku, and I'll use Heroku for now. So this name should be fine. It needs to be unique, but I think that should be fine. So I'm going to create the project, and you can. Okay, so in this case, the name is not, it's not unique. So Heroku, there's already somebody who's called their.
So that's probably me. That's because I tried this out and I did set it up and got it working.
Okay, well, that's good to know that our error handling is in fact working correctly. So I'm gonna try AG-Grid demo test. Okay, that's also already taken.
And 1, 2, 3.
Are you allowed numbers? Let's see. Should be fine. Okay, that looks good so far. It's impossible to do a demo without like some kind of unforeseen issue. I feel like that has to happen. But yeah, so you can see in the background, the GitHub repository should have been created. Our database has been spun up, and this, let me get rid of these errors here. Our database has been successfully provisioned. So I should be redirected to the data browser. And this is really where we use AG-Grid. So you can see that we have a list of all the tables that have been created in our database, which map exactly to the schema that I chose earlier in the onboarding process. And then
so we kind of skipped over that step because one of the things that makes Prisma really interesting is that it has a very lightweight domain specific language schema for defining all this and creating the relationships, and then you just magically create the database and persistence mechanisms after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes like creating a database schema and especially changing it to update it super painless, which is awesome for development.
I think what we can perhaps do is maybe if you navigate to the schema on the left-hand side, then we can have a look at the schema, and then we'll also be able to kind of map that back to the data browser. So over here, where we have the various models as defined in the schema, you can see the interaction, there's a song, and if you scroll down a little bit, there's an artist, an album, playlist. So if you now navigate to the data browser, you will be able to select one of these models that have been defined in the schema. So if you were to, for example, select a song, this now contains some seeding information that Emily selected during the onboarding flow. And right here, this is where we are using AGGrid in order to generate this grid of data. We are using the AGGrid community library as well as the AGGrid React, which allows us to use it as a React component.
Yeah, which is cool because the community edition is completely free for commercial use. You can do what you want with it. So it's great to see examples of people actually doing that, because I think a lot of people think the community edition is not capable enough, but clearly you're using it because you started writing your own grid, I think, and then went down that rabbit hole and then chose this to get moving.
Yeah, that is correct. I think there's always, the desire to start native and kind of then build upon that. And there are quite a few areas where we ran into a lot of features that we would require that would take a lot of manual overhead to actually get it implemented. And then once it's implemented, also maintain it. As the team grows, there's onboarding that you need to do, not only then for the project itself, but also a specific area within the project, such as the data browser. One of these areas that was a requirement for us that we really wanted is DOM virtualization, which is provided with AGGrid. So, without that, the performance would have taken a big knock. You can imagine if instead of having the 18 entries that we have over here, if it's 18,000, and we had to render DOM elements for all 18,000 records, that it would be quite have a bad impact on the performance. So with DOM virtualization over here, what's nice is only the actual entities that are within Vue have DOM element representation of them. And as the user then scrolls through the data, only then are the actual DOM elements being rendered for those entries as well.
Yep, and you've done fairly heavy customization of the grid.
Yeah. So on that note, like one of the other areas that we really wanted to pay a lot of attention to is the ability to provide a specific input mechanism for a user based on the data based on the type of the actual data that a user would like to edit. So for example, if you think what would be a good example, if you maybe open the interaction model, we can see if you just go to the middle tab where we are on song.
Oh, song.
Yeah, thanks. I think if you then scroll to the right, we should see the relationship with the amount of interactions for this specific song. Yeah, great. So one of the big ones is the ability to showcase relationships. And we do this using a pop-up. Again, what's really nice is the way in which AGGrid kind of handles this is you have the ability to stipulate whether or not you want to edit inline or through means of a pop-up so that you kind of break out of the dimensions of the cell. And in this case, wanting to show relationships, we definitely need to do that. And there's a utility function called isPopup that you can simply return as true. And then that will be the case with the rendering. And from here, you have the ability through a short link in the bottom left to open this subset of relationships in a new tab. And then the filters will already be pre-populated to represent only the actual records that is associated with the relationship. Now, on the interaction itself, if you were to just maybe scroll a little bit to the right, there we have a column called is liked, and this is a Boolean value. So if Emily were to select to provide a different input, the field itself, the cell editor that you have, will provide you with a mechanism that is specific to the data that you're changing. So we know it's a Boolean, so we're only allowing a user to select true or false. And with a string, for example, the value would only allow you to provide text input. And so what we did is actually, through means of one of our other requirements, is that we want at all times to have TypeScript support. And AGGrid also provides a lot of typings for the various features that it have. And we actually extended one of the interfaces for the cell editor params in then creating our own cell editor component that we can then use to kind of get the data and the type of the data, and then based on that, render the relevant component that would be needed to edit that. And that is, essentially what is happening over here. Yeah, I think another area that kind of always comes to mind, when making the decision to either go native and build it out yourself or selecting, a library, is styling. How do you get it to look the way that you want it to look? That's always a challenge. And what was really nice in this decision is there are a few ways that you can approach styling the grid itself. And there's a lot of provided themes that you can just use out of the box to get it up and running quickly with a specific look and feel. And we actually had AGGrid makes it quite possible to use one of these provided themes and then extend upon that. And they provide the ability to do so using a SAS mixin. And we kind of extended that to provide our own styles as well, to just make sure that we have the control over the look and feel of the final grid, rendering of the grid.
I always like to see other people's styling, because that's where I fall down. Every time I use AGGrid, I just use the built-in themes because my CSS is not good enough to do what you're doing here.
Yeah, what's very nice is it provides a full list of parameters that you can tweak and modify as you want to. And then in addition to that, every single cell has specific classes on it, the columns, the rows, the cells itself. And you also have the ability to then provide CSS around that as well.
Yep, we try to make it easy for people that know what they're doing, like you're doing, to do whatever is important, so the system that they create can match the designs that they've built up.
Yeah, and closely coupled to styling is also the accessibility of the actual component itself. You have the ability to navigate each cell with your keyboard as well, and that is normally something that if you go the route of having an extremely customizable grid, that you lose that native keyboard navigation and accessibility when navigating through the data that is contained within the grid. And it's a massive bonus for us, the fact that the accessibility is also maintained within the grid.
Yeah, the programming team do work hard on that, because that is requirements for some of the banking clients that are using it. And because of the DOM virtualization that's used, it isn't always easy for them.
Yeah. Speaking of which, there are areas in which we opted to disable the DOM virtualization, and that is with our test suite. So we use Playwright to do our end-to-end test automation. And in that instance, that is an example of where we disable the DOM virtualization so that we can make more accurate assertions in our test cases.
Automating external third-party components through end-to-end GUI testing is always harder than just doing it low level at the React testing library stuff. Do you use React testing library as well to use this, or is it all Playwright?
No. Yeah, this is our test suite specific to this is all Playwright.
I'd love to see this stuff, but this is not in your open source part of your GitHub, is it?
No, this is this is not.
That's pay, because it's always great to learn how other people are automating and doing things. So this is as close as I'm going to get.
Yeah, I think one of the other benefits of this implementation that also helped along is that they're, just also speaking to the community library that we're using, the actual community with AGGrid is also quite extensive. There's a lot of support out there in the way that you can customize it. The documentation is great. That also kind of provides you with various silos specific to your application and how you want to use it, whether you're using React or Angular, for example. Now, there are different tracks that you can follow to kind of dive a little bit deeper. Yeah, I think, is there perhaps any specific questions that you wanted to ask from your side regarding the implementation or the grid itself?
I'm not sure I have a lot of questions, but I would love you to explore the tool in more detail so we can see some of the features of the ORM.
Yeah, okay. Emily, perhaps you can actually add a record to one of the models.
Yep.
Then we can actually also, navigate to the query console and show how the data that we actually added through the data browser is also available if you then navigate to the query console, for example.
Okay, so I'm just going to try a song. That seems like there's going to be less domain knowledge required to create a record. So that should be the default. This should be fine. Test user. Album ID is optional right now, but I need an artist. This should be fine.
So is that what the color coding is telling us? What's optional and what's mandatory?
It will provide feedback on the input. So these are optional, I can see, and then a file URL anyone should do. Album is also optional, seems like. Okay, so I'm still not. I need an ID, and then maybe I'll do this. Let's hope that works. Okay. Okay, that worked. Test user. Here we go.
All right, and I think if you navigate to the query console, just to perhaps provide another dynamic to this, is if you change over there, we're having some pre-populated, predefined queries for you that you can execute. And if you were to modify one of those queries to say, perhaps get the first few songs, or in this case, just because we have a limited amount of seed data, I think you can get all the songs. Then we'll be able to see the entry that we just made through the data browser be returned in the query console as well.
Oopsies. Okay, song, and I'll use a find unique on this one. Okay, so that doesn't have to be unique as specified by the schema. So I'll just try and, or maybe find the first one that has this name. Song, find first.
So does it care about the uppercase U in the name?
Perhaps, yeah, it should. User. Yep, that was it. Thank you.
So what we're seeing here is the actual client interface that is open source, but you've put out the cloud GUI on top of it. But this code that we're seeing on the left is what people would use if they were using your ORM client. Is that right?
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. So
this provides a nice way for users to kind of get onboarded through the cloud, but then, perhaps if they're not that familiar with the client side as well, then this will give them an interactive playground to start writing queries and get familiar with it.
Yeah, it's great to always have a little playground, because each one of those, that little play button means that you can run each of those queries individually. So this could just be a big scratch pad of stuff that you're exploring and experimenting with. And people would be able to connect to this via a proxy. What is the data proxy?
So this is the data proxy basically manages connections for you. So if you're using, if you deployed your application in a serverless environment, you might want some kind of tool that manages these connections for you. And when you sign up or you create your first project, we will automatically create a data proxy API key for you. And you see that when you get to the end of the onboarding, you'll have a data proxy API key, but you can also use your default database connection string and connect directly to it without going through the proxy. And you can also add more revoke keys in this tab.
Another like really nice feature about the data platform is the ability to create separate environments. So when you are busy working with your data, you don't always want to play around with production data. That's not the data that you want to play around with.
Yep.
So you can create a separate environment that will connect to a different data source that you can then use to essentially discern different types of like data that you want to perhaps test in either the data browser or the query console.
Yep, and
so similar to
the data that's
yeah?
the data that's put in by default is using one of the Faker libraries based on the schema that you've created to create data that looks sensible. Is that correct?
Yes, that is great. And then also from here, you have the ability to invite more members to your project. You can specify different roles for them that will determine their access within the project itself.
Cool. So is there any other part of this that you want to draw attention to?
No, I think maybe if you just navigate back to the environments.
View all?
Yeah, and then where you can also just select one in the select environment.
Okay, so did you create custom filter drop-downs and things for these columns? Because we've seen cell editors, we've seen you highlight the actual cells in the grid when you're doing editing to show manual, which is done through cell rendering. And then you have custom sort comparators in the back in order to support all the different sorting that you're using.
Yeah, what's also nice with the way in which you provide data to AGGrid is that you have the ability to specify which data should be sortable. So on the various columns over here, if Emily were to perhaps click on name, it will sort the various data according to the name. And this is also an added feature that is provided with AGGrid.
But you've customized the header to make it look nice as well and to change the layout.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people are not aware of just how much customization is present in the community edition. And you've basically customized everything.
Yeah, it really provides you with such a solid foundation of an out-of-the-box solution whilst not restricting you to what is actually capable. So for us, it was very important, to mold it to our needs, and we were able to do that with AGGrid.
So could you click on the filters section and we can see what the filters look like?
Yep, so you can specify different fields for this table or this model here that you'd like to filter on.
And does each one of those filter value have, so it doesn't have a drop down written, but it has presumably validation on the back there. Okay, mm-hmm. Cool. And the add record was using full row editing. Right. Cool. So we probably explored most of the GUI then. I mean, what I was particularly impressed with was the embedded grid in the pop-up cell for relationships, which is always a hard thing to figure out how to do in a GUI. And then you've got filtering on that as well, so you can filter down to specific items.
Yeah, there's a few areas of the data browser that is in our pipeline to extend a little bit further. So for example, this pop-up in particular is a view representation of the relationship. So we would ideally also like the ability to provide inline editing for a relationship that appears within a pop-up. So in order to provide a quick and easy way to access those relationships is through the link in opening this subset in a new tab through which you can then edit it. But down the line, this is definitely an improvement that we will look to make.
So the key benefits to people are currently the ORM is open source, completely free, and the plan is to keep that open source and free. Yep. And yes. So anyone can use that in any project, no matter what. And then the cloud data browser is there to help people access and experiment with schemas in more detail, manage it through connection pools, and control user access, and all the things that are harder to add on if you're working in a smaller team. To me, it looks great. And the user interface is really well styled and configured. So hopefully we'll just keep seeing more improvements from it. I mean, and I managed to use it, which is always a good sign, because I try to use these tools before I get there, and some of them are too hard. But this one set up nice and easily, hooked into a database, and I was working fine.
Awesome. That's great to hear.
So any last words?
No, thank you for your time.
All right,
and for allowing us this opportunity to run through it. Oh no, it's great. Thanks for showing it. Thanks for spending the time with us. And so where do people find you? Prisma.io. Yes, Prisma.io, and you can head on to cloud.prisma.io to sign up for an account on the data platform.
All right, so everyone, cloud.prisma.io, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.